Welcome back, everyone. I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Vidal Grapera. Vidal is an experienced engineering leader. He hosts the popular Managers Club website and podcast where you can find interviews with top engineering leaders. He's currently an engineering manager at LinkedIn and has also led teams at Uber, Autodesk, and Walmart Labs. He holds an engineering degrees from Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Southern California, and an MBA from Santa Clara University. He served in the U.S. Navy Reserve as an engineering duty officer. He is a co-author of Pro Smartphone Cross-Platform Development, iPhone, BlackBerry, Windows Mobile, and Android Development and Distribution from APRESS, and Engineering Leadership Interviews, Lessons Learned and Best Practices Gathered from Interviews with Top Engineering Leaders Around the World. I'm personally really excited about his topic of time management. I think that's one thing that's super, super important as an engineering leader, and that's also quite often overlooked. So I'm personally excited to capture some takeaways and learnings for our roles. So thank you so much, Vidal, and we're excited to have you.
All right, thanks, Kate. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll share my screen and we'll get started. Let's see here. Can you see my presentation okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
All right, great. So I'll get started. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's a real honor to be at the conference, especially during these times. And also thanks for taking the time out this morning to come learn about this topic of time management for engineering managers. So this is a really super vast topic. I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour. I'm not going to be able to cover absolutely everything here, but here's a quick outline of what I do intend to cover. I'll cover a little bit about why time management is hard for engineering managers. I'll discuss a little bit how to rethink how to use some of the tools we use day to day to be more productive. I'll give you some techniques for planning your day, week, and month, and the things you have to do. Time allowing, we only have 30 minutes. I will try to share with you some tips that I picked up along the way. I mean, I'll try to do that throughout anyway, but I have a special section just on tips. And then we'll have I'll share with you some resources, wrap up, and Q&A. And my intent is to leave you with some actionable takeaways, like Kate said, that you can apply in your daily, day-to-day work. So again, a little bit about me. Like Kate said, I work at LinkedIn as an engineering manager there. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I am on a mission to help engineering leaders everywhere learn and improve. So I'm very passionate about that. Back in the day, I had a startup where we did mainly productivity tools. So I'm a real geek about time management, personal productivity, getting things done, all those topics. And I'm even writing an ebook on this, which will come out later this year. So if you're interested in reviewing that, just reach out to me afterwards. So a little bit like why it's important, what you may be able to take away from the presentation. If you were an engineering manager, of course, I'm going to try to leave you ideas on how to do your job better, because there's a lot to do as an engineering manager. But also if you're a manager of managers, and you're taking on more and more levels of responsibility, then, you can't just brute force the number of hours to scale yourself. So there is a limit there. So you have to learn to be more efficient. So hopefully some of these techniques will help you in improving your efficiency as you scale yourself and your organization. And finally, for an individual contributor, some of these techniques might apply to you. It might apply to you if you're a tech lead. And I'll try to point out some places where these techniques would apply and where they might not apply. One more thing I'll say is this topic can be especially overwhelming for new engineering managers. So if you're a new engineering manager, you may find this particularly useful. I have this side project I run. It's a blog and podcast at managersclub.com. And there I've interviewed over 90 engineering leaders. And one of the questions I ask all of them is, what's your workday like? How do you manage your time, emails, etc.? And they're like, oh, wow, great question. Let me tell you, and they shared with me so many tips. It's a real challenge for most people. And so I'll share with you some of the things I've learned from them and also what I picked up in my own personal experience. So a little bit like, what are some of the reasons that this is hard psychologically? First of all, you're not going to get everything done. Okay. And that's kind of hard to accept sometimes, but it's just true. You're just not going to. And so you have to learn to say no and drop things. And that can be difficult for people. There's never enough time, and that's totally normal. So sometimes people get stressed out about this. Even the most successful engineering leaders and entrepreneurs and people that you know, they have the same amount of time that you do. So they've made it work. And so there are techniques that you can pick up and to make yourself more efficient. There's this really interesting article. It's been shared with me so many times and I've read it. If you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It's called The Manager's Schedule versus the Maker's Schedule. It's an article by Paul Graham and it's linked here. Basically, the article talks about focus time and how creators, for example, ICs, need large blocks of focus time to do their work, but managers operate in a different world of manager time where you're dealing with very short 30-minute meetings often, lots of context switching. And so this article really makes a good distinction of these two modes, which I recommend you read. It's pretty insightful, and a lot of people talk about it. And here's another thing. Now, you really need to be, one difference between an engineering leader and say like an IC is you really have to be conscious of how you manage other people's time. Because ideally you should be a force multiplier, someone who's making people more productive, getting more things done. But I mean, we've all seen it where, as an engineering leader, you can also waste a huge amount of people's time. So you need to be conscious of how you manage other people's time to make them productive and not waste time. So it's very important to keep that in mind. And finally, it's interesting, since we all work in IT and software, there's actually some analogies we can draw from computers and scheduling algorithms. Things like not thrashing yourself, bricking yourself, avoiding excessive memory swaps. There's lots of kind of scheduling algorithms and stuff you can think of and try to apply them to yourself. And I'll make some analogies to those in the presentation. Another thing which can be a challenge is sometimes being a perfectionist. So I'll mention these two concepts. One is Parkinson's law. This is a picture of Mr. Parkinson who quoted this law. For those who aren't aware of it, it basically states that work expands to fill the amount of time allotted to it. And this is something that managers intuitively understand. And, for example, will give tight deadlines to ensure work is done, but they sometimes won't apply it to themselves. So it's good to keep this in mind for yourself as well, and to time box things. And there's the Pareto principle, which is also known as the 80-20 rule. And here, you'd be surprised sometimes if just by doing, 80% of the work, you might get a lot of benefit from it. So you don't necessarily have to do everything. Sometimes it's better just to take a quick pass at something, do a quick draft, send it out. And sometimes that's good enough, rather than trying to be like too perfectionist. So keep these both concepts in mind. Say a little bit about multitasking, because this is another concept which kind of negatively impacts time management. So it's very tempting to think that you can multitask, and people like to do this. For example, you'll be at meetings and you'll see people with their laptops open and they're at the meeting and they're trying to listen and also like write code or respond to emails. And this is just not very effective because human beings are single-threaded, and they really just can't do more than one thing at a time. And this has been the subject of much research, that your IQ will even go down by 10% when you're multitasking. So this is not something you want to be doing when you're doing important leadership work, when you're writing important documents. You definitely don't want to be multitasking. Multitasking might be good if you're filling out expense reports and watching TV at the same time, because you don't need a lot of intelligence to do that, obviously. But be aware that multitasking is not really going to help you produce high quality work. So I would not recommend multitasking. In fact, I recommend the opposite. It's like focusing on one thing at a time. I want to talk about interruptions, because this is a big thing that comes up in time management. People are always like, wow, like I get interrupted so much. It's impossible to get anything done. I don't have time because I keep getting interrupted. And this is an important misconception for a lot of managers and new managers. You actually need to love interruptions. You should learn to love internal interruptions, because that's often your job. What made you successful as an individual contributor and a coder was having big blocks of focus time, sitting down and just, coding and focusing on a problem. But as an engineering manager, what makes you successful is inviting interruptions, helping other people, being available to your team, because you are an unblocker. So you should not complain about interruptions, but actually learn to love them and deal with them, because that's actually a core part of your job. Now, with that said, it's totally okay to be strict with external interruptions. I mean, talking about interruptions from third parties, visitors, social visits, things like that. That you can be totally brutal with, and I think you should. But internal interruptions from like your team, your peers, those you actually need to accept those and really love them. So now I've covered some basic concepts. I'm going to talk about some of the tools and some techniques you can use. So one is email. Let me just start with email, because this is probably the number one thing people talk about. And as an engineering leader, you're often going to be swimming in a sea of emails. So there's this concept of inbox zero, which is like super popular. It's been mentioned by so many people that I've interviewed, and I've actually adopted it myself after like so many people talking about it. And I think it can be really valuable for you. This was popularized by a talk, I think it started back in 2007 by Merlin Mann. He gave a talk at Google, and you can find that video if you want to watch it. But basically, you don't want to touch emails more than once. You want to empty your inbox. And this is a really useful thing. So what I try to do every day at the end of the day is leave my inbox basically empty. And I found this to be super helpful. It also is much less stressful to deal with stuff like that. So I would really recommend you look at inbox zero, and you can read more about it. With that said, with email, I have a couple other tips for you. The first thing I would do is like just quickly scan my email with the priority of, can I unblock anyone or another team? Because one email that's sitting in your inbox as an engineering leader could definitely be blocking someone on your team. It could be blocking an entire other org. So I think that's number one priority to help people, is to scan for that. But you should, as you're going through your inbox, kind of to go back to my analogy of computers, you kind of want to do an order in time, right? You want to go through the emails like one time each, not like n squared and keep going through them. So when you get an email, you should either delegate it, reply to it, trash it. Like you should do something with it, create a to-do or task out of it, but not have to keep going back to it over and over again. With that said, also, here's a good place to apply the 80-20 rule. A short one word or one sentence answer that may not be perfect might be more than enough to answer someone's question than writing like a long multi-paragraph essay, which people don't really have time to read anyway. So just saying like, what's the minimum I can do to like move this conversation forward or answer the question can often save you a lot of time and just be sufficient. I'll say another thing about email. There's so much I could talk about it. I give a whole presentation just on this. Is I totally recommend you turn off all email alerts. This even includes the little bubbles, like on my phone. I don't even show the number, because it's just very tempting if you see like a little red number and it says like 10, you're like, oh, okay, or 100, I should go look at that. So I would turn off all alerts. I'd turn off all bubbles, all notifications, and just set time periodically to check your email. And I'll check my email a couple times a day, or, when I'm between meetings and I have like, those 5 or 10 minutes that you don't have anything, you can really do productively. Sometimes I'll do that, but you really should avoid the temptation to just kind of keep going back to email because that can just thrash you. I'll say another couple things about email, and that is filters and rules. This is something I use a lot and I think is super helpful. And so here's like some example rules that I find very helpful myself. One is emails addressed only to you. So I have a rule: if an email is only addressed to me or where I'm specifically named, Vidal, blah, 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 then those are very important, because if it's addressed specifically to you, like who else is going to respond to it? So that's an important rule. Another rule I'll create is emails that come from my manager or manager's manager. Obviously, for many reasons, those are very important, whatever they're writing to you about. I'll create rules to get emails from my team, right? So obviously I want to give priority to anything that my team is writing about, my team is asking me for. That's very important. Peers that I'm working with, those are very important. Any emails with like action required, invite to edit or comment on documents. I'll have rules for alerts, outages, if there's any kind of critical notifications like that. But then also I'll have like rules to like file away newsletters and automated emails that aren't that important. So having a good set of email rules and filters can be incredibly important in just helping process your email more efficiently. And then finally, I'll just say, if you're just totally buried in emails, you could declare email bankruptcy. And some people do this, and you'd be surprised if you just declare email bankruptcy. It basically means like starting over again. If there's anything super critical, for the most part, people will reach out to you again. So it is possible to do that in extreme scenarios. Let me talk a little about calendars now. This is another super important thing. And, you know, calendar is a tool. And you should remember, like, whatever happens, the calendar is not the enemy. I know at most corporations I've worked at, calendars are open. They're, and they're very easy to abuse because, you know, you can just like open someone's calendar and like drop time on it and, you know, just create to-dos and stuff for people. So what you need to do is kind of protect your calendar, but the calendar is a tool. So you could, so things that I like to do is I can scan my calendar first thing and see what meetings can I skip, cancel, etc. If there's a way I can cancel a meeting because you don't need it, like totally do that. Defragging my calendar. This is another popular technique a lot of people do. So what I'll try to do is put like items together, for example. Or, you know, like if you have a meeting and then there's like 30 minutes and there's another meeting and there's 30 minutes, you know, one is kind of defrag, like put meetings closer together if you're able to move them. So you can free up blocks of focus time that you have available. And then what I also like to do is kind of put like meetings together. So example of this would be like, if I have one-on-ones, right? So if I'm kind of in this one-on-one mode, you know, I might put like 2 or 3 one-on-ones back to back. So that way my kind of brain's already kind of in that mode. Another thing I might do is if I have a meeting with the team and then I have another meeting that maybe involves a subset of the same people, then I'll, you know, maybe put those together. So, you know, the people don't have to like go back and then reconvene later. So trying to like keep meetings with the same people next to each other can be helpful too. Techniques that other engineering managers have told me about they do is they'll group things by day. So there'll be themes by day. So maybe Mondays they do one-on-ones, Tuesdays they do like work on some other projects. So these are all like important things you can do to help you in your calendar. I would say also, you know, avoid the temptation to overschedule your day. So plan breaks because there's always going to be some unplanned work, some thing that you didn't expect will come up. And if you don't leave any buffer in your day, then you're basically bricked, you know, because there's nothing you can do. So I'll try to at least leave 1 or 2 30-minute blocks during my day, which I call like DNS blocks, like do not schedule, and I'll just block out this time. So then I can use it if I need, like for some impromptu meeting that comes up, or I just need it as a break. So I think it's very important to do that. Let's see. I'll say a little bit more on calendar, which I think is really useful. Sometimes, you know, you don't really have to go to meetings because lots of times people just want someone at a meeting for, you know, just to give some point of view or just to represent a team. So this can be a great opportunity for you as a leader to delegate and create like a learning opportunity for someone. So don't feel you always have to go. Maybe you delegate that to a tech lead or someone. You have to do it in moderation because, of course, ICs want to focus more on doing focus work, but often you can decline and send a representative, and that can help you. A lot of companies will declare like a no meeting day. Even if your company doesn't do that, you can do that for your team. And so you can consider that to help recover time for people. Another technique, which is really popular, a lot of people do, is color coding their calendar. So I color code my calendar a lot, and it also helps me with defragging because I can see, for example, like all my one-on-ones, I color them green, and all the work for this one team I have purple and the other have orange. So that way, when I'm defragging stuff, I can easily try to put like colors together, and so it makes it kind of useful. And then I'll say just one more thing about calendar, which can be helpful, is to set meetings with yourself. If you you should do that. Like I'll put work to do on my calendar and I will block out periods of time to do it. And it's usually easy. It's really hard to do that like in the immediate time. So usually what's easier is to like book stuff like maybe 2 weeks out, because then your calendar's not that busy. And it's also kind of a technique, obviously, when you're trying to meet with other people, is like it's often very hard to find time now, but if you book something a couple weeks out, there's more likely to find like open blocks of time. Moving on, I want to talk a little bit more about meetings themselves. So meetings, for a lot of people, you know, as a manager, can often be like 80% of your work, up to 80%, 50 to 80% of your time can be spent in meetings. So here's the thing, you should learn to love meetings. And by that, I mean, you're going to be in these meetings anyway. So you might as well enjoy being there and try to do a good job of them and, you know, not suffer in the meetings. So I think running effective meetings is super important for your team, because that way you can help them. But if you also run super effective meetings, you can be a role model for other people in your organization to run effective meetings. So effective meetings can have agendas, they can have meeting notes. And a lot of engineering managers I've talked to are like, you know, if there's no notes, there's no action items, the meeting never even happened, you know, or it's not useful to me. So I definitely recommend being a role model to having good meetings, can certainly help. I always recommend, if you can, to end a meeting early and return time to people. I know how many times I've been in a meeting and, you know, just because we're using things like Google Calendar and Outlook, you know, the default meeting times are 30 minutes an hour, right? So someone will set, you know, an hour just because that's the default. And, you know, we reach a decision in 35 minutes. And then for the next 25 minutes, what do people do? They just sit around and they just, you know, talk about other random things. So that's not a good use of time. So once we reach a decision, I always try to like end the meeting early and return time to people. Whenever you can say to the people in the meeting, hey, you know, we're done, I'm going to return to you 20 minutes or 15 minutes. People always react well to that. So I think that's really important, to try to end early and return time to people when possible, which is also kind of keeping with, kind of related to Parkinson's law. If you schedule less time than you really think is necessary, if you try to like underschedule the time, it often will cause people to really focus on the topic. It'll be like, hey, we only have 15 minutes to talk about this. We only have 30 minutes to talk about it. So people will get more down to business than if you say like, we're going to have like a 1 or 2 hour meeting on some topic where people think there's a lot of like extra fluff time that they can like pad with random discussions. So keeping the meeting time very short can also help people focus. With regards to focus, I also really like to have this rule at my meetings of laptops down. So laptops down, cell phones down, and but you really have to keep this rule, because, you know, if you let like a few people do this, unless they're like the note taker, for example, at the meeting, or the one presenting the slides, then other people will get the idea that it's okay. But if you're ever at a meeting, notice how many people are paying attention to the speaker. Because if they're not paying attention to the speaker, if they're like multitasking, they're trying to answer email, I've even been in meetings where people are trying to write code during a meeting, then there's something wrong, right? Clearly the meeting is not valuable to them, and then they're not paying attention. So you'll often see, you know, someone will say something in the meeting and then, you know, like, oh, well, I'm sorry, can you say that again? I wasn't paying attention. So that's not useful. So laptops down is a very good rule to make your meetings productive. So that way you can end them earlier too. Another thing I like to do is send surveys after meetings. I know some engineering managers that send surveys after every single meeting they have. I think that's a lot, but sending like quick Google Form surveys to ask, how was this meeting? How could we make better? Is certainly a good technique, and I've done that. And I'll say just one more thing about meetings to help make them more effective, is sometimes you can eliminate a meeting entirely by doing the meeting in writing. And so by this, I mean creating, for example, a shared Google document, sharing the document out, having people comment on the document. And this can be super useful too for people who maybe are shy to speak up at meetings. Like they might, you know, be better writing stuff. It's also asynchronous. And then you can always have a meeting later to discuss the comments in the document, but lots of times having a meeting in writing can eliminate the physical meeting like altogether. In regards to planning, I'm talking about like personal planning. I would consider using like an asset allocation strategy. So by this, I mean, look at your week and how you're spending your time, right? This also helps if you color-coded your calendar, for example. If your goal is to spend maybe 20% of your time doing recruiting, 50% of your time doing recruiting. You actually have to look at how you're spending your time on that and allocate it appropriately. And a lot of engineering leaders I talk to will either like on Fridays afternoons, if they're not too tired from the week, or Sunday more typically, like do a review of their calendar and how they spent their time in the previous week and how they plan to spend it in the next week. And that can be super, super helpful. So I'd recommend using that. No presentation on time management would be complete without talking about the Eisenhower Matrix. For those who aren't, this is also known as the time management matrix or the 4 quadrants, which was really popularized by Stephen Covey in his famous books. But what I put on the screen here is a copy of the matrix. And so this is always a useful thing as you're prioritizing your tasks to think of. I've actually created what I call the EM version here. So I've added a couple extra items with the stars and bolded here. So for example, in the top quadrant 1, urgent and important, this is stuff you cannot avoid doing, right? It's both urgent and important. So crises, pressing problems. Here, of course, you have interviews. You know, if someone's on site, obviously you need to interview them. Internal interruptions I've added here because those are actually really important parts of your job. But then in important but not urgent, you know, you have like a lot of strategic things, relationship building, and for example, recruiting, like always being recruiting, which is like very important for engineering managers. Having time to think of setting the vision for your team, strategy, one-on-ones. These things often aren't that urgent, but it's super important to do them. So here I'm just sharing. And then, for example, in urgent but not important are these external interruptions that I've talked about. So this is a good way to think about how to use your time. I'm going to try to move a little more quickly here. So with to-dos, everybody has a bunch of strategies for to-dos. Like, I think one of the most important things people do is create a daily to-do list of the top 1 to 3 things they want to do. I actually use a stack of 3x5 index cards, which I keep at my desk. And so I'll just like scribble down there like the 3 things I really want to do that day. I also have them on my Kanban board, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it's just kind of useful just to pick like a couple things you want to focus on, and just check that you get them done at the end of the day. There's to-do list apps on my site. Like, people recommend me so many different to-do list apps, and I've tried a bunch of them. They're really cool. Most of them, you know, it makes it very easy to you know, create to-dos and organize them. I think one of the challenges with to-do list apps, though, is it makes it almost like too easy to add to-dos. And you know, you can add a to-do in 2 seconds, but to actually get that thing done could take like forever. So it actually can be a little bit stressful to have like lots of to-do list items. So I'm going to talk about that. And then one other thing I'll talk about to-dos is generally they don't have a sense of time. You know, they may have an alarm, but they don't have a sense of time. So if it's anything that takes more than, say, you know, 5 minutes or so, I really think it's important to put it on your calendar, because otherwise, when are you going to get to do it? Another thing I like to do here, which has been recommended to me and I think is very, very good, is create checklists, because there's so many things going on that you don't want to let anything fall through the cracks. So I create checklists for myself. I have a weekly checklist and a monthly checklist of things I want to check on in my team, different reports and metrics I need to look at, different conversations I need to have. So if you create checklists, this can really help you so that things don't slip through the cracks and you have kind of some structure. So I find that really useful. But I'll share with you my, what I think, this is like a big pro tip I'll share with you, which is using a personal Kanban board. So why do I like a personal Kanban board? For those of you who have studied Agile, you know, Kanban is one of the Agile frameworks. And I really love this tip. I got it from a friend of mine who's a very successful engineering manager. And so, yeah, again, like I said, to-do lists can be very overwhelming. Like, they stress me out when I have a to-do list with 1,000 things. But here's what I'd like so much about a Kanban board. So here's a screenshot of my Kanban board. I've just blurred out the text of items. But here's the things that I think you can find really useful about it. One is, so in the left-hand column, you know, this is my, look at the columns I have. So I have my backlog, which I've called options. And notice I've labeled it options. Is this still worth doing? Which is really always reminds me that, you know, there's always going to be so many things that I have to like prune this area. Okay. I have a column for today. And in Kanban, you have this concept of work in progress limits. So here I can do up to 4 things. I could say I'm going to do 10 things today. Sure. But the reality is I'm not going to do 10 things. I'm going to be lucky to get the 3 or things done that I plan to. So I'm just being very realistic. And so I really like that, okay, having this. I have a column for stuff I'm currently doing. So even though I say I'm gonna do 3 or 4 things today, I'm really only gonna do like 1 or 2 at a time. So that's very helpful. Waiting, I love the waiting column. So like if I'm waiting for a decision on something, I'm waiting for approval, I'm waiting for a document, I'm waiting for some Jira ticket to be processed or something, I'll just put something in the waiting column. And then what's really nice is I can just walk this column like every day or 2 and just check on these items. Like, oh, I'm still waiting on this. Oh, I haven't heard from this person. Oh, I need this decision. If someone asks me, hey, what's going on with something, I can just go to my waiting column and say, oh, it's right there. And this is what happened. So I think the waiting column is a very beautiful thing. The done column is great because here I can see all the things I've done. And so I can get some sense of achievement, like, wow, I did all these things. So can kind of make you feel good that you're actually doing something. And then the final thing I'll note in my personal Kanban board is I use color coding. So I can match this color coding with stuff that's in my calendar for consistency. I'll also label things, for example, red. These are tasks, for example, that my management or leadership asked for. So that, so I don't drop the ball on any of those. Since I think we're kind of running short on time and I want to leave time for Q&A, I'm going to skip over the tips and ideas. I'll leave you here with a couple things. So there are several really good books on time management that these are some that I found very useful. Getting Things Done by David Allen is a very classic one. When the Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing is very interesting because it talks about the best time of the day to do stuff. For example, doing stuff in the morning, is better for a lot of creative work. The Checklist Manifesto is really good about checklists. I love checklists. Personal Kanban actually is a book about doing a personal Kanban board, which I highly recommend. There's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is a total classic. And I think this is the one where Stephen Covey talks about the 4 quadrants. And there's another book, The Surprising Science of Meetings, which talks about, again, how to run really good meetings. And since you're going to be in meetings a lot and you want to like run them super well and be a model for effective meetings, I think this book can be very useful to you. So again, I want to thank you for your time. I hope you found this useful. And so this is my contact info. You can find me on Twitter at vgrapera. You can email me at LinkedIn. So I'm vgrapera@linkedin.com. And you'll find a copy of this deck at my website, managersclub.com/talks. I'll post a copy of this deck. And I think I'm at time, so I will happy to take questions. I thank you very much, and I hope you found this useful.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. We have a lot of comments and questions and ideas in Slack, so I'll read to you some of the live Q&A questions here. The first one from Mike. So new engineering managers, particularly at growing organizations, often will still be relied on for their maker skills. If you can't be all maker or can't be all manager, how can you approach time management differently when straddling these roles?
I would say that, you'd have to kind of divide your day would be my recommendation. So, if you're going to have to do maker stuff, then you need focus time. And so, that's the biggest distinction between a maker and a manager. So maybe you can be like, the manager in like the afternoon and you're the maker in the morning, right? So maybe you block out like blocks of time to do coding or design and architecture and stuff at one part of the day, or like alternate days. I think you're going to need, like, I don't think it's going to work well to be like, like I think I tried to do this in my previous life, right? Like, I'm going to be like a manager. I'm going to go to a status meeting for 30 minutes, and then I'm going to try to code for 30 minutes. I'm going to go back to another meeting for 30 minutes. Like, that's not going to work well. So I think if you're in this mixed mode, I think you're going to have to try to block out like blocks of time to be, either in either role to be successful. That'd be my recommendation if you can get away with that.
Great, thank you. How do you enforce laptops down in a remote environment?
Well, I don't know how to do that, honestly. That's more like in a physical meeting, like at the office. I wish I had a way to do that. good question. I honestly don't know. But yeah, I just noticed when people are like on their laptops in a meeting, you can note, and the more people have their laptops up, it's a great sign of, it's not a good sign of the meeting being very well run or valuable or useful if everyone's like on their laptop. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, thank you. What tool, if any, are you using for your personal Kanban board? We had 2 people ask that question.
Yeah. So that's great. So it's not a very fancy tool. I think it's called kanbantool.com. It's kanbantool.com. They have like a free plan. And then, I just use that. And it's fine. What I don't use is I don't use like the company like Jira instance or anything, because I like to keep like my personal Kanban like totally separate. So yeah, I just use like one of these third parties. I think personal Kanban tool is fine. It's quite nice.
Thank you. Where do one-on-ones or repeat items show on your Kanban board, if they do?
Well, one-on-ones aren't going to show there. What I would have on my personal Kanban board might be action items from one-on-ones. My one-on-ones just show in the calendar, right? So I schedule repeating meetings with, all my directs, and then my peer one-on-ones, and, my skip level one-on-ones. So those are just in the calendar. Here's where I would just keep like action items from there.
Yeah, great. Do you have any opinion on the Pomodoro technique?
I think the Pomodoro technique is good. I think it depends on the kind of work you want to do, right? So I think Pomodoro is probably good for managers because, like I like to use that technique. I will like time box stuff myself. Like if I have to write a report or an email or something, I'll say, okay, I'm going to spend like 10 minutes on this, 20 minutes on this, no more than half an hour. And I'll do that, which I think is really good. Pomodoro is like, you set this timer and, you take breaks after periodic things. So I think that's can be really good. I don't think it works that well for software engineers, because software engineers need like hours of focus time. So unless you're going to have like Pomodoros that are, hours and hours long, it probably wouldn't be as effective. But for like the kind of work engineering managers do, I think Pomodoros can be very good and help you like time box your work. I like them.
Oh, thank you. Okay, we have one more question. How do you deal with leadership adding more tasks on your schedule? When it's already full, do you expand your hours for them? Do you reprioritize?
So that's a really good question. Okay, so you're always going to get that, right? So first of all, that's just normal. Leadership's always going to ask you to do more and more stuff. So, the first answer is like yes. Okay, so you want this thing done. Obviously, it's important. It's coming from your leadership, so got it. You can ask like, what's the importance of this, and when do you need it? And I think a lot of engineering people are kind of like, they kind of default to no, right? They're like, no, we can't do that. We're too busy already. So I think the first way is to look at it more like, okay, yes, like, let's see what we can do. And then you're going to have to figure out, okay, if you take this item on, what else do you have to drop, right? So you always have more to do than you possibly can. So maybe what you do is a task that you have, to take on this new task, which must be very important, once, you check for that and they ask you to do it. There may be some other tasks you have to do that you have to delegate to someone else, or that has to be, dropped or put off or delayed. So I think that's what you do. I don't think it's sustainable to say, okay, if you keep, getting more and more tasks to like work more and more hours and work more and more days, because it's just not scalable and it's not sustainable for you. I mean, you could do it in some like emergency situation, obviously, but I think you have to learn, like, to take those tasks, take them with grace, like with a smile, say, okay, sure, when do you need this? What's the relative importance compared to other things? And, find a way to accommodate it. And there's going to be some other lower priority thing. There's always going to be something lower priority than that, may have to be delayed or put off, or it could be an opportunity for one of your directs to give it to them. It's like, hey, I've got too much stuff to do here, so here's this other task, which now can be an opportunity for you.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, that's all the Q&A that we have. But like I said, a lot of conversation, Vidal, if you want to check it out in the Slack channel after this. But thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and for all of your advice and wisdom. Thank you so much.
Awesome. I'm glad you guys found it useful, and glad to be here. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, have a great weekend. Thank you.